What is going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 42. I'm your host, Marcus. And in this episode, I have a special guest for you guys. I'm actually talking with Terry Tucker. He is someone who is lived a very interesting life. He has not essentially allowed negativity into his life at all. He has had multiple leaps in his life, essentially starting from NCAA Division One basketball, going into marketing departments for Wendy's, to going into the SWAT as a hostage negotiator, uh, writing a book, becoming an entrepreneur, all while over the past couple years he has been battling a rare case of cancer. Now, I wanted to bring him on because he has a phenomenal story about motivation, about not allowing your struggles to identify who you are, to take on the world and not be fearful. And it is one of the biggest reasons I wanted to bring him on and to share his story with you. So, without further ado, let's get this episode started. All right. Well, welcome, Terry, to the show. I'm glad you can actually take some time out of your day to come join us today. You have a very intriguing story, and I must say that I was very excited to bring you on. Most definitely, when I saw your email and your story, it was just the email in itself was very exciting, and then just the mindset and everything, because that's something I'm very much about. But when I dive deeper, there's so much more to uncover there. So, first of all, welcome, Terry, to the show.
Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to talking to you today.
Yes, most definitely. And I myself, like I said, I've been really looking forward to getting you on the show. So I'm glad there's a quick turnaround rate to get you on here. So for those people who don't know, I guess ultimately, like, what is your origin story, right? Because you have just a phenomenal story in general, as opposed to your struggles and stuff that you're going through. So can you give everybody just a little bit of your origin story? Who is Terry Tucker?
Sure. So I am the oldest of three boys. I'm born and raised in Chicago. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall, and I played college basketball at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. Actually, I have a brother who's 6'7", who was a pitcher for the University of Notre Dame baseball team. And then I have another brother who was 6'6", who was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the National Basketball Association. And then my dad was 6'5". So I kind of joke that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, there wasn't a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on in front of us. But, you know, my 5'8" mother was the boss. Didn't matter how big, strong, tall we were. Mom was the boss. So after I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now, but this was long before the internet was available. And I was kind of, all excited to make my mark on the world with my newly obtained business administration degree. And I look back now and realize kind of what a knucklehead I was to think I knew anything about business just because I had a degree. Fortunately, I was able to find that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. But unfortunately, I ended up living with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mom care for my dad and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. In my professional career, as I said, I was in marketing at Wendy's. I was a hospital administrator. I was a police officer, and part of my role as a police officer, I was an undercover narcotics investigator. I was also a SWAT team hostage negotiator. Also owned my own school security consulting business, was a girls' high school basketball coach, been a motivational speaker for a little while now, was an author last year. But for the last 9 years, I've kind of been battling this rare form of cancer. And then finally, my wife and I have been married for 28 years. We have one child, a daughter who's graduated the United States Air Force Academy and is a lieutenant in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Oh, wow, that's incredible, and congratulations to your daughter. I served in the military for 8 years myself, so that's phenomenal to hear. And your story in itself, right? Like your mindset and where you're coming from. Like a lot of people, just to be one position that you've had in your life, right? Like people would possibly dream just to have that one position, and you've had multiple. And for me, I've always that's what like intrigued me to you is the fact like I have done like different leaps in my life, like everybody wants to call like leaps, like. And what was really intriguing is that I heard and I listened to one of the other podcasts that you were in, and you were talking about how, I think it was at the age of 37 that you made that leap into law enforcement, and coming from being an executive officer and everything. And the reason you did that was because of the fact that your dad had sadly passed away, and so you felt like you're free to do as you pleased. And for me, like I've made like multiple leaps like that. And like, what makes you follow, like what guides you to want to follow that? Would you call it like intuition to want to go out and live your purpose like that?
Yeah. I mean, it's always kind of been, things that I've really felt in my heart were my passion, my purpose, my why, whatever you want to call it. Basketball was for a number of years when I was young and all the way up through college. I devoted a lot of time to that. And, if you think about it, I played Division I college basketball after having 3 knee surgeries in high school. And the first 2 were, there was way before arthroscopic surgery was available. So I've got the large zipper scar on the outside of my knee, but focused enough and was able to come back from that to play in college. And that was a purpose then. But, my purpose always for me was law enforcement. But as you mentioned, my dad was opposed to it because his dad was a Chicago policeman and was shot in the line of duty. And he remembers the stories his mom, my grandmother, told about the knock on the door of, Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. So when I expressed interest in going down that road, my dad was absolutely not. And he kind of had my whole life planned out for me. And so, you have a choice. You have a choice of, well, do I keep doing this sort of dead end job that, yes, I'm learning and I'm growing, but it's not my passion? Or do I totally shift my whole focus and do what I feel in my heart I should do? And for me, that was a no-brainer. It was, when I would get up in the morning, when I was a policeman, it was, what can I do today? How are we going to make a difference? How are we going to help? The business jobs were more like, it's a job, it pays the bills and things like that. Like I said, I met a lot of great people, learned a lot, but it just wasn't my passion. And my passion is really what drives me. It's something that, yeah, you got to do this. You got to do it now. You can't wait for it.
Yeah, most definitely. And it's like when you talk about your passion, did you like know exactly what it was? Because obviously you've had family that have been in law enforcement and stuff like that. So is that what intrigued you? So you knew part of that, or is it just something like you felt like this is something I have to do? It's either now or never. And I know the whole your story with cancer and stuff like that. Did that kind of accelerate that desire to want to go out and go achieve those things?
I mean, my cancer was much later in life.
Mm-hmm.
I knew my grandfather, sort of. He died when I was 7 years old. So, a lot of the stories I heard about him in his law enforcement days were more stories that my grandmother related to me and things like that. So I guess it was just, I guess I knew I wanted to do it. I always felt I was the kind of person, when we were in law enforcement, we always said there's 3 types of people. There's sheep, there's the sheep dogs, and there's the wolf. The sheep are the people, the wolf are the criminals, and the sheep dogs are the cops. And I always kind of felt that I was that type of person. I was a sheepdog. I wanted to help people, to protect people and things like that. So it was a real easy transition based on what I felt in my heart and my soul to do, even at 37 years old.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, I'm going through that myself. I've lived through it many different times. Like I said, I've gone military to civilian life, to going into programming, to going now to entrepreneur. And I know you've again had those different jumps and leaps. But being said, one of the biggest things I've found is like when you talk about like, identifying, right, and struggle. And you talk about how you loved law enforcement for a long time, but you didn't identify as being a law enforcement personnel, right? You identified as just following your passion. Like, what do you think is like key for people to understand about that, and to be able to not? I think a lot of people identify as like their struggles that they're going through in life. What is your viewpoint on that?
Yeah, I think, a lot of people get, pigeonholed. They get into a job and they're kind of in that job, and they're in that job not only in their own head, but the powers that be in their company and that think, okay, you're just a compliance person, or you're a salesperson, or whatever you end up being in life. And I there were several law enforcement, several policemen that I worked with who were 35, 40-year veterans of the force, that their whole identity was tied to that gun and that badge. And it was kind of sad because, I mean, the department didn't want to, quote unquote, retire them. So they kind of moved them into an area where they were sort of out of the way, and, here, just go do this. And it's really kind of a nothing job. But they couldn't retire because their whole identity was tied up in their job. And, and I always tell people that, we talk a lot about finding your purpose and things like that. And we equate purpose to being our job. Your purpose doesn't have to be your job. Your job can be, this is what I do to pay the bills, but my purpose is to write, or to volunteer, or music, or whatever it ends up being. So I guess I don't want your audience to think that your purpose has to be your job. It certainly doesn't. But I always tell, especially young people, whatever is in your heart that you want to do, that you're burning to do. And I realize there are people out there that know exactly what they're going to do. I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to take over the family business, whatever. Most of us don't know what we're going to do. We kind of are, like you say, we're working our way through this. Let's try the military. Well, yeah, okay, that was good. But what, okay, now I want to move over here, and I want to move over here, and I want to move over here. I think, I'm making a generalization, that's a very, very much an exception to the rule. Because I think people get in jobs and they just stay there. And they stay there, and they're in dead end jobs, and they're in dead end jobs. And every time they want to move, their brain kicks in and says, whoa, 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 wait a minute. The brain likes the status quo. Don't move. Don't get out. I know a ton of people who are in dead end jobs. So I'm like, why didn't you move? Why don't you go somewhere else? Why don't you improve yourself? But I think it's really our brains, which kind of comes back to, your original point in the beginning of all this. What are our brains telling us? What are our brains saying? But it's that if you want to stay in the status quo, that's great. But the only way you're going to grow, the only way you're going to figure out your purpose and make a difference is to get outside that status quo, to do the things that scare you. So I always tell young people, if there's something in your heart you want to do, but it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things you're going to regret are not going to be the things you did. They're going to be the things you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to go back and do them.
Yeah, most definitely. I 110% agree with that. Now, as far as like when you are looking for like these different things, like you have written a book, right? You've again jumped to different parts. You were a negotiator, right? And then you also became the entrepreneur and started motivational speaking. Like, what really like drove you to want to become an entrepreneur, coming from that job? You said you loved, like you weren't tied to that badge, but you did love that job. Like, what really drove you to want to be an entrepreneur? And talking, when we were talking about that whole getting out of your comfort zone and doing stuff that's scary and stuff like that, what really drove you in that way?
So when I met my wife, and when my wife and I got married, I was a suit and tie, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday kind of hospital administrator. And at a point in time, I'm like, hey, hon, I'd like to totally get out of that and be in law enforcement and work nights and get shot at and all these other kinds. And she was incredibly supportive of me. And the reason I got out of law enforcement is because she's the primary breadwinner. and she lost her job. I was a policeman in Cincinnati, Ohio, and that's where we lived. And so she found another job in Texas. So that necessitated me getting out of the Cincinnati Police Department. And now here I am. Well, what do I do now? And our daughter was at the point where she was in high school, and she unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, got my height and actually went to the Air Force Academy to play basketball. So I wanted to make sure she had good coaching. I wanted to give her an opportunity to, I guess, follow in my footsteps and play in college. But I also wanted to work. I mean, and basketball is not necessarily a full-time job when you're coaching in high school. I was not a teacher in the school. And so I thought, well, I've got, I was on SWAT. I've got all these skills. What can I do? And she was in a private independent school. So I went to them initially and said, look, I'll do an assessment of your campus. I'll look at your policies and procedures. I'll train your staff on safety and security, and I'll do it for free because my daughter goes here and I want her to be safe. And that started, and they liked it. And they're like, and then one person told another person and another person. And eventually I had a business opportunity, and I'd never really worked for myself before, but it was like, okay, I've got these skills. I've got this education. Why don't I use that to help other people? And that's how I became an entrepreneur.
Very nice. You just kind of fell into it ultimately and following your curiosity ultimately.
Exactly. I mean, I had certain skills, we always used to tell our daughter, play to your strengths. Well, I had all this training from SWAT. It was like, well, why don't I use that to help schools be safer?
I love that. I love how you kind of fell into it. Because I know, like, even for myself, like I try to, I've always, like, I've had like a shift in my life where, I had that perspective shift where my father passed and much the same. He passed from ALS. And so that kind of like shifted my perspective from getting out of that cube into start thinking outside the box and into other things, and then start reaching out. And to see how you did and made that transition, it's interesting in the fact, especially trying to go down the entrepreneurial realm and figure out like what I enjoy, right? And trying to align that with my skills, like you're saying. So, but I know you have so much great information out there, especially on your website I've looked at. But can you go over, you have this thing called the 3 F's and the 4 truths. And I feel like that is really powerful and something I think everybody can get something out of.
Yeah, the 3 F's are something I've used in a conjunction with my 4 truths during my 9-year battle with this very rare form of cancer. And the 3 F's are basically faith, family, and friends. I have a very strong faith in God. I realize a lot of people don't, but for me, it's important. It's a very important part of my life. My family, that was one thing that my mom and dad, if they taught us nothing else, and they taught us a bunch, the importance of family. They so many times had a divide and conquer. It's like, okay, I'll take this son and I'm going to this game, and you take this son and you're going to that game. And, we were all over the place because we were all in sports, and everybody's playing on different teams and things like that. So my parents taught us the value of family. And then certainly my friends. And I'll tell you, when you get a cancer diagnosis, you really do find out who your friends are, as opposed to your acquaintances. So those are the 3 F's that have been very important to me through my cancer journey. And I guess what I've learned over these last 9 years, what I've been able to kind of codify are what you alluded to, my 4 truths. And I'll give those to you. They're just one sentence. And if I'm looking down, I have them on a Post-it note here on my desk that I see multiple times during the day. And the first one is, you need to control your mind, or your mind will control you. The second one is, you need to embrace the pain and the discomfort that we all experience in life and use that to make you a stronger and more determined individual. The third one is more of a legacy truth, for lack of a better term. And it's this: it's what we leave behind is what we weave in the hearts of other people. And then the fourth one is pretty self-explanatory. As long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. And I use these truths. They're part of who I am. They're something that are they're undeniable to me. They're in my heart. They're part of me, and they're not always easy. And if we go through them a little bit, they can be nuanced a little bit. And I don't think people look at them in maybe the same way that I do, but they're very important to me. And so the the 4 truths and the 3 F's are really what's gotten me through these last 9 years with cancer.
So you find, is that kind of like your motivation? Is it something you said you read every day to motivate you on those hard days?
They are. I mean, they're things. I am on a clinical trial right now for tumors that I have in my lungs, and it's a drug that just it beats the heck out of me, to be perfectly honest with you. And I had a nurse recently that said, Terry, nobody would think anything less of you if you quit this, if you got off this drug, because it's so physically demanding on your body. And I tried to explain the 4 truths to her. I could tell that I didn't really get it into her, that she didn't really take those in as part of, oh yeah, I get this. But what I told her was, my doctor may take me off the drug because it's not working, or I may die on this drug. I just had a very good friend who did. But I will never quit this drug, especially right now, because I'm having some success with it. And people don't get that. It's kind of like, oh, this is hard, so let's quit. Well, what if you didn't quit? What if you took that second truth, take the pain and the discomfort that we all experience in life and use it to make you a stronger individual? We're all going to experience pain in our lives. And it doesn't have to be cancer pain or a chronic illness or anything like that. It could be as simple as, you flunk a test at school, or you break up with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, or you don't get the promotion at work that you think you deserve. Pain is inevitable. Suffering, on the other hand, that's optional. That's what you do with that pain. Do you use that pain to make you stronger, to make you tougher, to make you more determined? Or do you wallow in it and feel sorry for yourself and want other people to feel sorry for you? I have those days. I want your audience to understand that, there's no S on my chest. I do not wear a cape and fly around with magical powers. So I don't have any of that. I have bad days. There are days when I cry. There are days when I get down. There are days that I feel depressed. I just don't let myself stay there. I use that pain. I flip it inside. I use it as fuel. I burn it as fuel, or I use it as energy just to make me stronger.
I love that. It's definitely something I've always used. Is there something you particularly do when you feel like these thoughts, these negative thoughts and ideas? We're talking about people that are that again may identify as their struggle that they're going through. What do you think can help them like flip that? Because I've all been there. I know there's seasons, right? We all go through seasons where we're real down on ourselves, and there are times when we're really high on a higher note. For those people, even take like someone that has problems getting out of bed every morning. What would you tell a person like that to motivate them? You think a mantra or something like that they should develop could help them move forward?
I think it kind of goes back to that first truth about controlling your mind, or your mind will control you. When I was back in high school, I think I mentioned I had 3 knee surgeries. And I remember when I went back playing, my brain started putting these negative thoughts into my head. Like, you know what, you're probably a step slower, and college coaches aren't going to be interested in recruiting you. Now, I think the first thing you need to do is recognize you have these negative thoughts coming in. I've read articles that said every day we have between 60 and 70,000 thoughts in our head. So, it's not like, oh, a negative thought came in, there it is, I'm going to deal. We're constantly being bombarded by this stuff. But if you take that whatever it is, and that's exactly what I had to do. I'm like, okay, wait a minute. No, I'm still playing at an elite level, and coaches are still contacting me about playing for their schools. So no. I got to flip that switch. I got to flip that narrative into something that's more positive. Now, I recently read an article, and this kind of goes back to the person who can't get out of bed. there was a professor back in the 1950s at Johns Hopkins University who did an experiment. And the experiment was he took rats and he put them in water that was over their head. So they had to tread water, and he wanted to see how long they would tread it. And it was roughly, most rats, about 15 minutes. And just as they were getting ready to sink to the bottom, to give up, he grabbed them, he pulled them out, he dried them off, he let them rest for a while, and then he put them back in the tank. Now, how long do you think those rats treaded water the second time they were in there? You want to take a guess, or you want me to just tell you?
You can go ahead and just tell me, because I think I've heard something similar about this particular study, I believe.
60 hours. Yeah. So here are these rats. The first time they get in this water, they can only tread water for 15 minutes, and then they're going to sink. They're going to drown, and they get pulled out. That study taught me two things. One, the importance of hope in a person's life, and two, just how much more our bodies can give us when we don't think we can go on. You know, the Navy SEALs talk about their 40% rule, where, you know, if you think you're at the end of your rope, you can't go on, you can't do another push-up, can't do another, run, another step. You're only at 40% of your maximum, and you still have 60% left in your body to give to yourself. So all these people that are, you get to, I can't do it anymore. You can. I mean, I can promise you, because I've done it. I mean, I've been to the point where I've been so sick that it's like, well, we're going to give you more treatment and we're going to make you sicker. And most people are like, no, I wouldn't do that. And I was like, yeah, give that to me. I will use that to make me a stronger person. I know that is entirely different than the way we're wired. We're wired to avoid pain and discomfort and to seek pleasure. But what if you just turn that around? What if you use that pain instead of running from it? I mean, we all know people who run from, they run to alcohol and drugs. They run to promiscuous behavior. They run to decisions that make them, that are not good for them. What if you didn't run from it? What if you just took it? And I know it's easy for me to sit here and say that, but I'm also the kind of person that can tell you, I've done it. That's happened to me. I've taken that pain and I've used it to make me stronger.
I love that. Now, would you correlate your whole mindset and everything? It seems like you've established a mindset like this at a young age. Is this something that you would say, like, your parents kind of raised you in that fashion that allowed you to have this mindset that you can overcome any obstacle essentially that's been put in front of you?
I don't know if they consciously did that. I remember when I went to the Citadel, at the time it was an all-male military school. It was down in South Carolina. I was living in Chicago, never been away from home, had a girlfriend. I mean, homesick was, I was terribly homesick. And, the first thing they do is shave your head, and now you're marching around. I'm like, wait a minute. I came here to play basketball. Notice I didn't say I came here to get an education. Literally, I came here to play basketball. And I'm like, no, this is not for me. This is ridiculous. Are you kidding me? And I was literally walking over to quit, to tell the coaches, I'm done. I'm leaving school. I'm not going to do this. I'd never quit anything in my life. And before I did that, I said, you know what? I'm going to go over to the student union and see if there's any mail. And I had a letter from my father. I took the letter, went up to the rafters, the nosebleed section of the field house. I was literally 50 feet away from the coaches that I had literally come there to tell I was going to quit. And I read this 7-page handwritten letter from my father, who basically said, you've done so much to overcome all your knee problems and your knee surgery. We're proud of you. We love you. We care about you. But basically, you've called home 7 times since you've been down there, and not one time have you asked how anybody here is doing. You are so in your head. I mean, basically, it was a letter where my dad said, pull your head out of your butt. It's really what it was. I mean, It was, you have this tremendous opportunity to get a college education. And I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. So my dad was like, it's up to you, and I kind of look at that as God giving me a choice. Terry, you got a choice. You got this really hard road at the Citadel. It's going to be tough. It's going to be difficult. Or you got this easy road. You can quit. You can go back home, maybe get a job, whatever. It's up to you. It's your choice. And that was really the first time in my life that I ever felt that here's a life choice that's going to impact me for the rest of my life, and nobody's going to make it for me. Not my mom and dad, not my teachers, not my coach. I've got to make this major life choice. It's up to you. And, I'm up in the rafters crying like a baby. And I'm like, no, I can't do this. I can't quit. My dad loves me. My family loves me. I got to pull my head out and I got to make this happen. And 4 years later, I graduated.
Very nice. Yeah, I think just like a support system is obviously something that's extremely important. You talk about that with family and friends. Now, for those people out there that are perhaps they don't have that, right? Like for me, I've always used the example, like if you don't have someone, there's always books, and I've always talked about like having essentially a sit down with all your those people that you admire, right? And having like a conversation in your head, typically kind of thing. What kind of advice would you give for somebody that doesn't have a strong support system to help encourage them to want to go out and do these other things and make great changes in their life?
I would tell them that everything they need to be successful in life is already inside of them. They don't need to go find it. They don't need to go. I mean, maybe you need to go to a coach or a psychologist or something like that to help you pull it out. But there's everything you need to be successful in life is already there. If you don't have a support system, good. It's going to make you a more resilient individual. It's going to make you rely on yourself. I remember several times as a parent listening to our daughter have issues at school. And I never wanted to be one of those helicopter parents that, kind of swooped in and solved my kids' problems. Whenever something bad would happen, I would kind of just listen and be like, my mind be like, good. All right. Now I'm going to see how you're going to handle this. Now, there were a couple of times she was bullied. She would tell me about it. I'm like, do you want mom and I to get involved? No, I'll take care of it. And I'm like, man, for a kid in grade school, we must have done something right because, we were like, nice. Yeah, the kid is relying on herself and she's successful in taking care of that challenge. Then she's going to have more confidence to take care of the next challenge and the next challenge and the next challenge. So for people who don't have a support system, I would say, good, rely on yourself. Realize that everything you need to be successful already inside you. You just got to figure out where it is and pull it out and use it.
Yeah, I love that. I totally agree with that. I always find that going through more challenging things has always helped to build that and maintain that, even in my life. Now, if you are, speaking of which, and talking about trying to finding essentially the courage or finding confidence in yourself, right? There's a lot of people that just don't have that confidence. And I know a lot of stuff kind of correlates together, and it's a lot of the same stuff, repeating and going and challenging yourself. But for those people that don't have the confidence, right? Like what do you think something that they can do to help them build confidence? Because I know there's a lot of people, like we can even go back to that situation with someone not even getting out of bed. How do you build confidence in somebody?
Boy, that's a great question. I'm kind of coming up dry, other than, to realize that the more difficult things you do and have success in those things, or even if you don't have quote unquote success, but you learn something, then you can take that. People always just say, I can't do that. What if I fail? Well, what if you do? Who cares if you fail? And I think that's a big issue. People are afraid to fail. They're afraid to do anything outside their comfort zones because, people may talk about them. People may say something negative. Or again, I go back to good. Let those people talk. Let those people, I always say, Marcus, that if I didn't know you, but I knew the 5 people that you hung around the most, I bet I could tell you a whole lot about you. Just, having never met you. But the 5 people, your 5 best friends who you hang around the most, I can tell you a lot about you. Are they the kind of people that are going to uplift you and encourage you to do the things you want to do? Or are they people that are kind of, you can't do that. You're an idiot, or you're whatever, that's, and I understand, especially for young people, young people want to be part of the in crowd and stuff like that. But if you're not around people that are uplifting you, why would you want to be around those people at all? So I guess I would try to get around people that have your best interest in mind. But I'd also realize, again, going back to, you don't need other people to be successful. You can be successful in whatever it is. And I would put no limits, no ceilings on any of that. Just realize everything you need is already inside you. Just find it and pull it out. But the big problem with that is we got a million things going on. How many times do we just sit back, sit in the chair, be quiet, and just listen to ourselves? I don't think we do that. So I don't know if that's probably the best answer I have for your question. And I don't know if that was much of an answer.
Actually, I think that's a perfect answer, because I've always found that to be true too. I always found that I talk about like sitting in silence and stuff, and how important that is, and like becoming a critical thinker and thinking for yourself, and challenging your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs, right? And determining where they come from, I think it is ultimately really important. And that is a perfect example of that. If you could just sit in silence. And I think for a lot of people, that's challenging, I think, if you bring that up, right? But I think that in itself, like, you can find the answers in yourself if you could just spend the time to do that. But now another big thing, you have a book that is out, and you talk about the 10 principles leading your uncommon, extraordinary life. Can you go over some of those 10 principles?
Sure. I always love when people get the book, because the principles are in no particular order. Number 1 is not any more important than number 4 or 5 or anything like that. But there's always one principle that resonates with whoever reads the book. It's like, oh, number 4 was mine, or number 1 was mine, or number 2 was mine, and stuff like that. I'll give you, to start off with, I'll give you the one that resonates most with me. And it resonates with me because I've done it. And I'm not necessarily happy that I've done it in my life. And the principle is this: most people, kind of goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago, most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. How many of us have wanted to do something, but I'm not sure I'm good enough for that? Or, what are people going to say about me if I fail? That's not thinking with what's best for Marcus or for Terry. That's thinking with my negative mind or my insecure mind. So that's a huge one for me, because I've done that more times than I would like to over the course of my life. And I think a lot of people do. It's not something that I think is unique to me. I know a lot of people that do that. And again, it goes back to what you sort of put the cart before the horse a little bit with that, talking about, what can you do? How can you not think that way? How can, who cares what people think about you? And I get it, when people are young, they want to be part of the in group. I'm old. I could care less what people think about me. I always tell people, at the end of your life, it's not going to be what other people say or do that you're going to be judged on. It's going to be what you say or do. And so if there's that passion inside you, but you ignore it because you're afraid, I think that's such a shame in people's lives. You'd be so much happier if you took a chance. If instead of just dipping your toe in the water, jump in, see what happens. So that's one. There was another one that I like a lot, that talks about listening. And, when I was a policeman, we were, most of what we did, if you were in a uniform and you were in a marked car and you were answering radio runs, most of your interactions with people were face to face. Whether you're giving them a ticket or you're answering a radio run for domestic violence, you're there with people, and you can take visual clues on how they're acting. If you're talking to them and they're kind of looking around, and maybe they're looking to run or to escape. If they're balling up their fists, maybe they want to fight you. And you can see that, and you can mitigate that. You can sit them down, you can handcuff them, you can put them in your car, whatever is appropriate for why you're there. But when we were negotiating with people, the person we were negotiating with wasn't with us. They were, maybe even as close as on the other side of a door, but maybe as far away as several blocks away, barricaded in a house with a hostage and a gun. So we had to figure things out based on what people were saying, what people weren't saying, and how they were saying it. And there were many times where we'd spend a couple hours over here talking about whatever when the real problem was over here, but that person needed to burn off that emotional energy before we could get to the point where we could start talking about the problem, and potentially solving it. And the part in the book that I think is important and that we don't do a very good job today as a society is listening to understand as opposed to listening to reply. And, Marcus, if you're saying something and, I'm like, hurry up, Marcus, say something because I'm going to get my 2 cents in there. That's listening to respond. But if I'm sitting back and I'm like, oh, that was interesting, Marcus, why do you feel that way? Or, where are you coming from by saying this? Now we've got a dialogue going. Now we've got something that's productive as opposed to, shut up, Marcus, Terry wants to say something. That's just talk. This is a conversation. This is connecting, on a personal level. And if we can do that, think about all the things that we could accomplish in this world if we would just communicate with each other that way.
Yeah, most definitely. I've always agreed with that. Is listening, genuinely listening to somebody, I think is important. And it goes back to, I think, a lot of problem solving issues, right? If you are, again, trying to determine what somebody is saying, genuinely listening to what they're saying as opposed to looking for that. That's a perfect one. I've always reiterated that same one because I've always really and truly enjoyed that. But
they always say that the best salespeople are not the best talkers. They're the best listeners.
That's true. That makes a lot of sense. Now, what talking about different changes and stuff, I think the biggest thing that comes up is uncertainty, right? Like not knowing, and kind of going back to everything that we've talked about you making leaps, I myself making leaps. There's a lot of uncertainty there, and I think it goes back to what you're talking about, fear. And people, how do you think people can be comfortable with fear? Now, would you go like repetition? Would you dive in the deep end, right, to overcome fear? How would you approach that?
I think you have to face fear head on. I don't think there's, here's the issue. Here's what scares me. What can I do to get through it, over it, around it, under it, whatever it is, but to get past it. And you can't, I don't think you can tiptoe through the tulips, so to speak. I really think you gotta jump in. And there are things, people used to ask me when I was a policeman, do you ever get scared when you're a cop? And I used to tell them that any cop who tells you that they don't get afraid from time to time is either lying to you or they're an idiot. And I remember there were times when my partner and I would be going on just an innocuous run, a noise run, a neighbor called, please, go to my neighbors, knock on their door, tell them to turn their stereo down or their television down or something like that. And my partner and I were very in tune to that kind of, hair on the back of your neck that goes up. And there were times where we would be like, one of us would say, I got a bad feeling about this run. And if either one of us said that, we were always, okay, we're not going to dismiss it. We're not going to, it's a noise run. We're going to knock on the door, tell the person to turn their TV down and leave. No, we're not. We're going to be extra careful and extra cautious. And, people used to be like, that's stupid and stuff like that. Well, 5 years when I was in the drug unit, there was a guy that I worked with, and we arrested this dope dealer. And he told us the story that 5 years before, when this guy that I worked with was in uniform, he came to their apartment door, to this person's apartment door on a noise run, knocked on the door, told him to turn the TV down. They didn't give him any problems. He walked away. This guy told us that had he walked into the apartment, there was another person with an AK-47 behind the door that would have shot and killed him because they were cutting dope in the apartment. But He wasn't there for dope. He was there to turn the TV down. So, when that hair in the back of your neck goes up, you need to respect it. But you also can't, like, I couldn't say, oh, I got a bad feeling about this run. We're not going on it. You still have to move forward. You still have to be able to say, all right, we're going to be as careful as possible, but this is our job. Everybody's running away. We need to run forward. We need to run towards the danger, because that's what we took an oath to do. So I would just tell people to jump in, face the fear. I know it's scary, but I'm telling you, if you get past it, you're going to be so much stronger, so that the next time you have a fear, you're going to be able to conquer that one.
I love that. And I totally agree with that. Like, you have to just push through it. And you see the great rewards on the other side when you can actually overcome that. And it's just a split second, right? That you have to overcome it. It's not like something that is prolonged.
Right. Exactly.
But I got a question for you. So, like, through your whole experiences in life and everything, has there ever been like one piece of just really bad advice that you don't want people to take?
That's a great question. Bad advice. Usually it's, do you have any good advice? So that's a great question. Bad advice. I guess, oh gosh, I don't know how to answer that, to be honest with you. I'd really have to think about it.
Well, Stephanie, is there like anything in particular that, I mean, you've always been a go-getter, right? So it's always seemed that's the foot you've always had throughout your whole life. Like, you've never took any person's word for or holding you back. You've never come across anybody that has told you something. You normally typically shut it down, is what it seems like. So no bad advice at all, huh?
I'm sure if I thought about it, it'll probably be like tomorrow morning in the shower. It'll be like, oh yeah, kind of thing. It's where I always get my best ideas, in the shower. It's like, oh yeah, I should have. Nobody. I guess I've always tried to surround myself with good people who lifted me up and who wanted the best for me. And when I had toxic people in my life, I didn't want anything to do with them. I mean, whether it was a kid growing up, I still remember this. I was in maybe fourth grade or something like that. And it was report card time. And a friend of mine came over, and I found out this later. He took his report card and he put it behind my dresser because he got some bad grades and he didn't want his parents to think anything of it. And he lied to his parents that we didn't get report cards. And for some reason, it fell out. He didn't put it back very far. He fell out. And I was like, I wasn't his friend after that. I was like, are you kidding? You put me in a bad situation. And basically, you're a liar. You lied to your parents. And I get it. We're kids. We need to we need to kind of figure out, where our moral compass is and things like that. But I was like, no, I don't want you around. The teacher didn't give you those grades. You earned them. It wasn't like she just said, I don't like you, here's an F. It was like, no, you didn't do your homework. You didn't study for the test. You didn't do that. So I don't want you in my life. So I don't know. I can't think of any bad advice that I can give you.
I agree with that because of the fact I think you need to remove people. And I like how you've established essentially an environment in which you just thrive in. And that goes along with everything that you've essentially been talking about. But for one of my last questions for you is, what message do you want to leave people that listen to this podcast?
I'll leave you with a story. And if you mentioned you listen to some of my other podcasts, maybe you've heard this one. I tell it sometimes. Always been a big fan of Westerns growing up. My mom and dad used to let me stay up and watch Gunsmoke and Wild Wild West and stuff like that. 1993, the movie Tombstone came out. You probably saw it. Starred Val Kilmer as John Doc Holliday and Kurt Russell as a man by the name of Wyatt Earp. Now Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday were two living, breathing human beings who walked on the face of the earth. They're not made-up characters for the movie. And Doc was called Doc because he was a dentist by trade, but Doc Holliday was pretty much a gunslinger and a card shark. And Wyatt had been a lawman most of his life. And these two men from entirely divergent backgrounds form this very close friendship. And at the end of the movie, Doc Holliday is dying at a sanitarium in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which is about 3 hours from where I live. And the real Doc Holliday died in that sanitarium. He's buried in the Glenwood Springs Cemetery. And Wyatt, at this point in his life, is destitute. He has no money, has no job, has no prospects for a job. So he comes every day to play cards with Doc to pass the time. And the two men are talking about what they want out of life. And Doc says, I was in love with my cousin when I was young, but she joined a convent over the affair, but she's all that I ever wanted. And he looks at Wyatt and he says, what about you, Wyatt? What do you want? And Wyatt kind of nonchalantly says, I just want to lead a normal life. And Doc looks at him and says, there's no normal, there's just life, and get on with living yours. Marcus, you and I probably know people who people are just sitting back and they're like, well, when this happens, I'll have a normal life. Or when that happens, I'll have a successful life. Or when this happens, I'll have an influential life. What I'd like to leave your audience with is don't wait. Don't wait for your life to come to you. Get out there, figure out the purpose you were put on this face of this earth to do, and live that purpose. Because I can promise you this, if you do that, at the end of your life, you're going to have a whole lot more peace and you're going to be a whole lot happier. And I'll end it with that.
I love that. And I want to personally thank you, Terry, for coming on. And where can people reach you, Terry, if they want to get a hold of you?
Sure. I have a blog. I put up a thought for the day every day. I put out the Monday morning motivational message, which is usually a video or a story on my blog. And it's Motivational Check. So motivationalcheck.com will get you to me.
Fantastic. And thank you again, Terry. Thank you, listeners. And we'll see you all later.